Hi, I'm Anushka,
And I'm Saika.
and welcome to Girls at ADHD.
We're two ADHD therapists with ADHD here to help you laugh, rant, cry, and unmask your way through adulting with ADHD.
This season, we're back with more unhinged moments.
Except now with guests.
So buckle up, hit play at two times speed.
And come spiral with us as we make sense of our beautifully chaotic brains together.
Hey everyone, I'm Anushka,
And I'm Saika.
and we're Girls at ADHD. Welcome back to season 3.
So today we have Caroline Burrows with us. So Caroline Burrows is an accredited mental health social worker, psychotherapist, and accredited EMDR trainer and consultant based in Melbourne. She has 20 years experience in allied health and is known for her neurodiverse, affirming, human-first approach to trauma therapy. Caroline provides nationally accredited EMDR training and consultation for therapists across Australia and internationally. As someone diagnosed with ADHD later in life, yay, Caroline brings both professional expertise and lived experience to her work, especially in helping people make sense of internal conflicts, shame, and self blame that often comes with an undiagnosed neurodivergent mind. She's the director of Mindful Living, a neurodiverse affirming psychology and counseling practice in Melbourne with a special focus on EMDR and trauma therapy. Caroline is a leading voice in helping therapists feel more confident using EMDR and parts work in a complex clinical practice. Hello, and thank you so much for being here.
That could really be essentially summed up as Caroline is a therapist and a ADHDer. I do appreciate your very kind introduction, though, which I amusingly wrote about myself. I always find it rather funny, that idea of me being a leading voice.
You are.
Oh dear, I wrote that. But thank you for the very generous introduction. That's really lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. I actually found you through another network of mine, and I told her about this podcast, and she was like, "You have to have Caroline on board. Like, you have to."
Thank you. I'm so looking forward to speaking with you both from, I guess, the professional and the personal.
I know we have a lot of questions about the work that you already do with clients, but I actually was wondering, one of the things that at least clients come through and ask me a lot is like, how do you know what's ADHD and how do you know what's trauma? And is there like a link between both things? And also, I guess this is such a like long-winded question now, but like, is there also like, growing up neurodivergent, is there trauma that also comes from that? Whether if you were diagnosed while you were younger or as you've, if you're a late diagnosed ADHD, like the three of us. Sorry, that was so long.
I understand. And I think really what you're asking about is the intersection between trauma and ADHD. And I do think that there is a strong connection between the two. And I think that's for several reasons. I think firstly, the statistics do tell us that there is a higher likelihood of ADHDers having experienced trauma in their life than neurotypical folk. And I think that's for various reasons. I think that, as you started to mention, the experience of being an ADHD in and of itself can be distressing and or even traumatic, particularly for late diagnosed folk, and those experiences that perhaps we might not even think of as traumas, let's say painful experiences or the accumulation of numerous pieces of negative feedback, really account to sort of micro wounds, I suppose, in a person's upbringing for many folk. And I think that also, thirdly, there is an overlap between some of the experiences of being an ADHD, so things like emotional distress or over stimulation in the nervous system, that actually is not dissimilar to what happens in, let's say, the fight or flight response when somebody has a shock or a scare or a trauma. And so things like feeling a racing heart or feeling an internal rush or a feeling of being driven almost like by a motor can actually be either or both the ADHD experience and or the experience of trauma. And so I actually think that there's probably no way of being able to absolutely tease it apart. I think that there is overlap, and probably it really depends a lot on a person's broader life experience and also the response of others in their life to them as they are. And for example, if somebody was diagnosed as an ADHDer in their early years and was in a very affirming, accepting environment and had a lot of supports and accommodations to help them be their most authentic self, the micro traumas or wounds of not having one's own needs acknowledged, accepted, or supported is certainly going to be a lot less than a person who, let's say, is diagnosed in their 20s or 30s and has spent their entire upbringing feeling like there's something profoundly wrong with them, or that they're weird or different.
So from what you said, it sounds like just because you have ADHD doesn't necessarily mean you'll have trauma, but it's more if you have ADHD that is not supported by your environment, the people around you, you don't know how to manage it, that can lead to a lot of messages of you're not good enough and all that stuff, and that could lead to trauma.
Well, I think that in of itself can be traumatic for some people. And so it's certainly not black and white, but I do think that the environment in which somebody is raised, not just in relation to their neurotype, but in relation to them as they are, the accommodations and acceptance and love and support that they receive or don't receive will make a significant difference to the experience that they have being a neurodivergent person.
100%. I think one of the things that I see a lot is that, like, people will come in for trauma therapy, and it's like, or if they're coming in for assessment, it's usually after they've done a few years of like trauma therapy around other unrelated sort of like, traumatic experiences when they were younger or into adulthood or whatever. And then realizing that, like, hey, I've done all of this work, but there's still something still feels like it's off or not right. And I've been learning about this, and now I'm starting to realize. And so one of the questions that I get asked is like, should I be working on my trauma stuff first if I've been through adverse life experiences and then getting assessed? Or should I just go off and get assessed because the medication does help? Because so many people come in and they're like, tried my friend's meds and they did work. Should I go and get the assessment done? I mean, I always tell people to do what they feel like is right. But like, what's your take on that, Caroline? Like, when you see people sort of coming in, do you ever get asked that question of like, what should you work on first, quote unquote?
Well, yeah, and I think that extends even beyond this particular situation or example. I think that's part of what people come to therapy for in the first place is not quite knowing what to focus on to support them and just feeling overwhelmed by a lot of different things. But I guess I would say that I don't think it's an either or. I think it's essentially a matter of it's really about what's the client's or the person's current distress most connected to, and the goals that they do have for the work that they're wanting to do at this point in therapy. And that's a collaborative process. The therapist and the client together can discern that. Obviously, the client's wishes are the most important at the end of the day. But I think, for example, if a person was experiencing really significant impact of a particular trauma or painful life experience, such as, let's say, nightmares or flashbacks, or really distressing, crippling anxiety related to fear of leaving their house because there'd been a horrible thing happen to them, it would probably make sense that you'd start with trying to support them with the trauma resolution, because that's what's causing the most impact and distress in their life. And conversely, if they are feeling like they're capacity to cope day to day with their organisation of their life and attend to their self-care and organising rather their appointments and being able to, essentially they're concerned about their own executive functioning challenges or interpersonal issues, and it feels like the ADHD question is really overhanging a lot of that, then that would be the priority. So I think it really drills down to what's the client's current priority, and that's in relation to what's most impairing and most distressing, and therefore the most pressing priority at the moment.
I also had an experience with a client where I've been working with them for quite a while, and then I think they heard over social media that ADHD can lead to trauma and vice versa, like everything we've been talking about. And then they come to me and just to confirm, I guess, as their therapist. And I essentially told them all the things we've talked about like the micro wounds, how they add up, And explaining that to them, I think I saw their eyes open a little bit and be kinder to themselves about like the experiences they've had, and actually just accept that, you know, they have been through trauma, even though it didn't feel like it. So I guess that got me thinking as to whether it was important for, like, say, therapists or clients looking for therapists, or people looking for ADHD therapists, whether the therapist should actually provide them that psychoeducation first.
Oh, look, I think psychoeducation is a very important part of the early phase of most therapies. I think it would depend, of course, on whether it was relevant for the person. So if somebody was coming to therapy and didn't identify that they were querying their own neurostyle or brain type, I don't think it would be relevant to necessarily introduce that concept unless we felt that it was something that was in the clinical picture. But of course, if the client is coming and grappling with these things, or that's relevant, then absolutely. I think psychoeducation is very normalizing. It's very helpful in reducing shame and reducing fear, and to help people to feel like they're understood actually by the therapist. If the therapist is able to help them join some dots and to look at it in a holistic way that is not only drawing on what other people might have experienced to really normalize it so that person doesn't feel like there's something wrong with them, but also to really communicate the information in a way that, as you said, is kind of like some light bulb moment really for the client, and then they actually feel really seen and heard, I think, if they feel understood. So that typically, I think, is an important part of the early stages of therapy.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, on the topic of therapy, there are so many different therapies out there, but I was actually curious if we could, like, explain to the audience a little bit about EMDR and also parts work and what that actually means, because I think a lot of the time people come in with this concept of like CBT, and like every time I'm like sitting in sessions, someone will come in and be like, what kind of therapies do you use? And I go through all these different, there's so many different types of things, and I guess like different types of therapies work better for some things. But in your experience and in your expertise and specialization, Caroline, could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, obviously, I'm very biased because I have a particular interest in those two approaches. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily the only way to approach these issues. However, I do think they have a lot of relevance for many people. EMDR therapy is a psychological therapy that stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And what this is based on is the idea that the brain has a natural capacity to heal, just like the body does, but that when we experience something that's really painful or overwhelming or traumatic, it can interrupt the brain's natural processing system, and that those experiences can essentially get stuck, and they can still have an impact long after they're over, both by feeling really vivid, being very emotionally distressing, and even shape the way we think about ourselves and others in the world. And so in EMDR, what we're wanting to do is to go beneath the surface of the tip of an iceberg and really work out this symptom or this issue that the person has in their life. Let's say the tip of an iceberg, like anxiety, where does that come from? So what experiences in that person's life have happened that essentially are stuck or unresolved? And in EMDR, we use a really fascinating thing called bilateral stimulation, which is usually the therapist moving their hand rapidly and the client following the therapist's fingers with their eyes. The idea being that those eye movements actually help to activate the brain's natural processing system, and goes beyond just simply talking about the event. Rather than just the thinking brain being activated, it actually really gets into some of those deeper, more emotional spaces around how that feeling is stuck and might be impacting that person still to this day. And it's a little bit like removing the splinter from a finger. So if you cut yourself, your body knows how to heal. But if you get a splinter in your finger and don't take it out, then the body's capacity to heal gets interrupted because there's something stuck. And so the idea is, through this eye movement process, it's facilitating the brain's natural healing process, really just getting it back up and running, essentially like removing the splinter so that the finger can heal. It's a bit like doing that. The brain can actually process the information and really get to the bottom of where that belief about themselves or that experience is really coming from. And in relation to your second question around parts work, I guess what that's about is often used in a integrated way with EMDR or separately, is the idea that all of us have different aspects of self, and that there is complexity, in conflict, and experiences within all of us that sometimes can feel a bit like there's a bit of a tension or a push or a pull between us. And actually working with those different aspects of our self. For example, the part of us that feels, keen and confident to work on a painful issue, and another part of us that's anxious about doing that. How we work with the whole person so that they can feel able to address the things that they want to achieve and do together in therapy.
I was gonna say I did Caroline's EMDR part one, and it was so fascinating because like I've heard people talk about EMDR. I have friends who are EMDR practitioners, and I was like, you have a little bit of an expectation and like understanding of something, but going in, guys, it's no joke. Like, if you have a chance, go and do some EMDR therapy just to like experience it. It feels like magic to me. I know it's not. I know there's also much science behind it, but it feels like magic. I think you know what it is. It's in my ADHD. It's like the dopamine of watching something happen in real time and like resolving. I'm not saying that everything is resolved all at once, but like seeing change happen in front of your eyes is so bizarre. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's a therapy that I've devoted this part of my career to. So obviously I have a lot of enthusiasm for it as well. And I think for a lot of people, they might feel pretty perpetually stuck with certain problems that just keep persisting in their life, and the idea of going beyond just talking about that to really resolving it on a deeper level, sort of getting to the bottom of it, I think for a lot of people is very, very motivating. And as you say, seeing the change. And what we mean by the change in EMDR is it's not a magic cure, but often people find that the experience that they're working on at the start of a session might feel really, really vivid, as if it's happening again all over, again, even though it's a long time ago. And that just seems to shift to be much less vivid, much more in the past. You can remember it without reliving it, and it feels much more manageable, and the emotions associated seem to really change, and it starts feeling very different, and the way you see yourself also really shifts to feel much more helpful and useful to, I guess, your current life and your strengths and things. So it's a great therapy.
Yeah, no, as someone who isn't trained in it, never done it, it does genuinely sound like magic. But what I do use a lot is parts work. I also like to explain it to clients as you're made up of several parts. And even though we have so much negative feelings and bad feelings about things like anxiety or depression or all like emotional dysregulation and anger and all that stuff that comes with ADHD as well. I feel like parts work is a way to see all these different emotions as like not having any malicious intent. And all of them are giving you some sort of signal or protection mechanism that maybe worked previously, but maybe isn't so helpful for you now. And I think reframing it that way starts, I guess, a lot of that self-compassion talk that a lot of ADHDers, especially late diagnosed ADHDers, need to start listening to themselves and being okay with just who they are. I guess with your work, working with parts work, do you see that there are some parts that tend to form over the years of someone who may be like a late diagnosed ADHD, or even just for yourself,
Yeah. Oh, look, absolutely. And before I share about that, I really like what you were saying. I think that it's a way of, in a really tangible form, a way that makes it less abstract and more concrete. Parts work is a way of just getting to understand our inner world and our own experience and the different aspects of our emotional world, and really getting to understand ourselves more and come to a point of much greater internal acceptance. And that's where, as you said, things like the self-compassion can be really developed, rather than internal hostility or aspects of ourself or parts of ourself that we hate or that we banish or that we're ashamed of or that we can't even accept. It's about self-acceptance ultimately, and a feeling of being much more whole. And I think for ADHDers, there's always going to be a diversity of experience depending on the person's life. But I think things like, for me, a big one has been the Firstly, I think in terms of my strengths and my natural personality traits and neurodivergence is having a part of self that's extremely quirky and playful. For me, I see it as an ADHD. My particular subtype's hyperactive impulsive. For me, I've got an extremely energetic and quirky part of me, right? And I also have a part of me that feels shame about being too much. And so sometimes I might, let's say, have an impulsive experience. Like sometimes in a social situation, I notice myself, I'll be in that situation and it's like some of the impulsivity and the hyperactivity comes to the forefront. And I'm having an experience where I'm talking really loudly and I'm being very, very charismatic and I'm really like the life of the party or the clown, the class clown as a kid I was. And so, and it's almost then that there's this kind of, it's sort of like a bit of a meta process. There's like another part of me sort of watching on and cringing, and that idea of, oh my God, just shut up, you know, like what do people think of you and you're too much. And then maybe later going away and ruminating and overthinking what I might have said or done or what might people think. And I guess that to me is just a classic example of parts of self. And the shame and the self-criticism, I guess, could be considered parts of self. And I think there's also other parts for ADHDers like the cool in a crisis part. You know, one of the real strengths of an ADHD brain style is being able to be very quick thinking, being very, very swift in spontaneous action. So there could almost be a sort of a kind of a crisis mode self that's actually very capable. And there might also be a part of us that becomes almost paralyzed with decision fatigue and mental overload and executive functioning challenges, like getting up in the morning and getting off out of bed and off to work might feel impossible at other times. So someone might consider that their I don't know, their overwhelmed part or something. So everyone's going to have different language for these things. But I guess a way I just help people understand it is parts is really just a way of either through a visual concept, like imagining what it might look like, or a phrase like a name that we could give to different aspects of who we are and our experience and how they might show up or get triggered or interact at different times.
All of your examples are so real. Like especially like resonating with having like the quirky personality and being like, that's such a core part. I feel like for most neurodivergent people and like, going out saying the thing, I come back home and I ruminate so often if I've said the right thing for no reason. There's no one said anything to me about it, but like it just goes on and on and on in my head. And so I think these are such relatable examples.
Yeah, and it's wild because they're, as you said, it's like the same kind of characteristic, but you can either perceive it as like a strength, but then it can be a double-edged sword. And it is also why a lot of people feel like too much. I think that just that phrase too much is like a phrase that so many of us have heard. Like even while you were speaking, I was like, we're living the same life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really helpful link back to the earlier points we were discussing about the intersection between painful life experiences and that, because it is not out of nowhere that idea comes about. It's the experience of being a neurodivergent person in a world that perhaps is set up perhaps for a neurotypical type of brain and social norms. And it may be, let's say, somebody, if we go with the example of being at a social gathering and being quirky or a bit verbose or a bit impulsive and then going home and ruminating and feeling shame, that may be linked to experiences in that person's life where in their school experience, for example, they were bullied or they were criticised for being too much, or where they felt humiliated. And so it may be that there are some unresolved experiences that have led to that core belief, I'm too much. And those might, for example, be some of the memories or experiences that we may choose to work through in therapy, whether that's EMDR therapy or through parts work. You know, what part of us holds the wound of that? I often talk to people about movies like Inside Out, and a lot of people can relate to that idea of Riley, the character or the main protagonist in that film. This idea of her inner world is represented through characters that represent different emotions. I think it could be anything from just everyday emotions and selves, but certainly if we've had painful trauma, that the wounds that those parts of us carry and the feeling we might have about certain parts of ourselves can be different, because it's particularly painful and difficult for some.
I feel like, we talked a lot about the trauma, the parts work, and all these things. I just don't want the listeners to end this episode going like, holy shit, that was a lot. There's a lot that I have to deal with and a lot I have to do. So I guess as someone, whether they are in therapy or not, would you have any recommendations or maybe some steps that say someone who's listening to this can take to at least begin recognizing their own parts and maybe, if possible, potentially learning how to be more self-accepting of their different parts?
Yes, and I don't think that it even requires somebody to go to therapy if they don't want to do that. I think it's even, for example, if we've been talking today about this idea of considering different ADHD, let's say traits, for example, as potentially being parts of ourselves, we might encourage our listeners to even just reflect on what their own ADHD traits are and how those might, if it feels helpful, be considered perhaps parts of them. And are there any of their traits as an ADHD that they feel particularly uncomfortable or comfortable with? And that then might, I guess, give a little bit more insight into, are there any parts of them that they struggle with or that they feel proud of, and how do they relate to their own inner world, essentially? It might even be watching Inside Out or rewatching it after what we've talked about today. And I guess pop culture reference, I think, can be really helpful because it's very normalizing. It's not about needing to go and do extensive therapy. It's just about even having language to understand emotions and traits and experiences that we have. I guess also I'd encourage people to just think about, do they see any link between certain aspects of themselves or traits in themselves that they struggle with or don't like? Do they see any links between those things and any experiences they've had in their life? If for example, somebody identifies, when I am quirky and loud, I actually both love it but also feel quite embarrassed and ashamed of it. It might just be not even, again, needing to do therapy work, but even just in a journal or just in a bit of time of self-reflection on a walk one day, just reflecting on, I guess, where did that all come from? Where did those messages come from? Is it that actually school was really hard for me because I felt like I was different to everybody else? And just making that link might be helpful. Or it might be, did I get those messages from a parent or somebody? And I think it's about then maybe perhaps making some discernment around whether any of that sort of thing is impacting on you enough to do something with it. It may just be that that's all you need, is a bit of insight. And even the insight helps us to feel a bit more self-kind and compassionate, because there's a sense of, this actually has been tough, and I kind of get where that comes from. And also just hearing us talk about that, if the three of us feel like we're almost living the same life, then it just goes to show that this is not anybody's inherent flaw. It's simply just this is the common experience of being a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world. And just life batters and bruises people anyway. Life's hard. People suck at times. We all have wounds in our past. And I guess if anybody is interested in getting some support around those things, I guess it would be then around where to look to for that. It could just be continuing to do self-learning around things like podcasts and self-help books and the like, or it may be to look into what EMDR therapy or parts work involves and seeking out a professional person to assist with that. But I think for me, it's also just about linking in with a tribe of other ADHDers and a sense of connecting connecting with others and feeling like you're not weird and different in a way that actually is shaming or isolating. It's actually something that you can get support through just feeling normalized and feeling like you've got other people around you that see and hear you and understand you. So connecting you with other ADHDers as well makes a huge difference.
I don't know about you guys, but I've reached a point in my life now where I think all my friends are neurodivergent, and I forget that that's like the bubble that I've ended up in by accident as an adult.
It's a great bubble to be
It's
in.
such a great bubble.
Like, it's
Like Caroline, our entire team at Umid is neurodivergent, so it's just like very like the team meetings, they're a bit of a struggle, but we get there. But it's so funny and it's so great to be around that energy that you can kind of just like let go and be yourself, which is such a great environment to foster. But then sometimes I step outside of our bubble and I'm in like the real world around other people who might not be neurodivergent. And I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, I didn't realize how much I'd been masking as like a young person, or like even just like sometimes meeting another ADHD and being like, oh, okay, like these experiences, I mean, your experience is always going to be unique to you, but like we were talking about in terms of personality, being like, like me being a little bit weird or a little bit quirky isn't like a bad thing, because you're also like that and we can accept that about each other and we can be more of that with each other, and that's nice. It's just nice to be yourself somewhere.
yeah.
Yes, it is. And actually, I was thinking just about the concept of parts that we've been talking about as well. And I think there's an interesting dynamic out there in the neurodiverse affirming movement at the moment about this idea of essentially embracing one's own self, and almost the idea of seeing our strengths as superpowers. And then on the counter side, some people feeling that in an effort to be strength-based, that can actually be a bit minimizing. And I actually think that the parts concept and that awareness that there are parts of me that, or parts of any of us as ADHDers, that we are proud of and that we love and make us unique. And there are also parts of us that do struggle and that are not inherently flawed or defective, but because of the experience of life and also being in a neurotypical world, as it were, that there are going to be parts of us that hold tremendous fear, pain, and challenges. And I actually think that the parts concept actually helps it to be, it's a yin and yang. It's not actually one is better or worse, or that it's all rah-rah superpower, or is it all disordered and a problem and deficit based.
It's like with anything, it's positives and its strengths, and there are like challenges and weaknesses, and you just have to be able to look at the fact that it is quite balanced. There are some really wonderful things about having ADHD, like we think out of the square, and that's really cool, but I struggle to make a phone call if I have to call the bank. So you win some, you lose some, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Understanding your parts help to build self-compassion around all of that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And it might be that we are curious and non-judgmental about the what part of me finds it difficult to make calls, and rather than judging that as, oh, there's something wrong with me, being a little bit kinder to, that part of me actually feels anxious about whether I'll say the wrong thing or feels whatever we might be feeling. And I think just parts helps to sort of externalize challenges and experiences in a way that's not externalizing it outside of us, but it makes it feel a bit like it's not the whole me. I've actually got, there's a real complexity and a nuance to it that I think makes it feel very rich, and we are all very complex creatures, and that's actually okay. And I actually wanted to share, if it's okay, I've got a particular resource that I hadn't even thought that I'd share, but I think actually in terms of
I love this book. I love that book.
Might find helpful. This particular book for our listeners, it's called This is ADHD, an interactive and informative guide, and it's by a person who's an ADHDer. But what I really love about this is that you were asking, before, I can't recall which of you was asking, but essentially around things that people can do moving forward. What I really love about this is it's got lots of different, I guess, components of what it's like to be an ADHD, and there's certainly a link to some of the trauma experience. You can see I've written a lot in it. It's actually got space really for journaling and for self-reflection, and it's a really contained, supportive way to do some personal work around understanding ourselves and our different parts as an ADHD. And it's very tangible, it's very tactile, it's very grounded, and it's very affirming and non-pathologizing, very validating. And so I can absolutely highly recommend that book for anybody who wants to just do a bit of their own personal reflection and growth.
Yeah, I also like how it's like very straightforward and visual as well. So it doesn't feel like painful trying to read and go through it.
Absolutely. And it's the sort of thing where you literally could just open up a single book and it talks about, clumsiness, for example, and if a person resonates with that and feels shame about that, actually just using that as some space to reflect on kind of what that's about and where that might come from, and also things that might help. It's actually got lots of ideas and supports.
Yeah, no, I think everything that you've been talking about, we've been talking about, is really just, it comes back to the idea that the antidote of shame or feeling shit about yourself is like talking about it and, going at it with curiosity rather than judgment. And that's when, talking to other neurodivergent folks, there is less shame because everyone's feeling the same thing. There's no judgment. The reflection is just curiosity. So yeah, I really like that. We always like to end our episodes with some sort of positive, inspiring messages to our listeners, because we do talk about a lot of the challenges and stuff that come with ADHD in the beginning. So we like to end it with something that's a bit more positive and just to tell people to relax and they'll figure it out. So what is your message for all our listeners today?
Well, I think it's about self-acceptance, and it's about embracing all of the complexity of what it is to be an ADHDer, and to come back to a sense of not being alone in that experience. And the fact that we've been talking, Anushka, you were saying about all your colleagues being neurodivergent, birds of the feather flock together. So I think
Yes.
The reality is there are a lot more people who are discerning and discovering that they're neurodivergent than ever before. And I see that as a tremendous thing. And I only see hope and optimism actually for all of this. I think it's a very good time. I think there are very challenging elements, of course, to being a neurodivergent person, but I actually think it's no better a time really to be a neurodivergent person. My stepdaughter was just diagnosed autistic, and the level of pride she has in that is unlike anything I think in our childhood we would have experienced, just because of the cultural, societal thoughts about that. So I actually think while it's not easy at times, it's actually a wonderful time where there's more resources and supports and opportunity for connection than ever before. And I guess I'd love to finish by just sharing a little vinyl sticker that I have on my ensuite mirror. It just says "too much?" ? Good.
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
I think we have a lot of fun, and we have a lot of light to shine into the world, and a lot of sparkle to spread around. And I just would encourage all of your listeners to keep shining bright, and also to be tender to that little flame, the little vulnerable flame that's a bit scared to be visible, but to hold both with kindness and compassion.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
I needed that today. So thank you.
My pleasure. It's been really lovely to speak with you both. Been a lot of fun.
Yeah, of course. Before you go though, let our listeners know where they can find you if they want to work with you.
Well, if they would like to experience EMDR therapy as a client, and that would unfortunately not be with me because I'm busy doing other things like training and consulting work at the moment, but I do lead a wonderful team of EMDR therapists. At least half of our team are openly neurodivergent, so we certainly have a lot of capacity to provide very neurodiverse affirming care. So that's mindfulliving.com.au. And we offer therapy services to people across Australia via telehealth or in person in Melbourne. And if people are therapists and are interested in learning from me in a more professional capacity, so a therapist wanting to learn EMDR therapy, it's my website, carolineburrows.com.au, that you can get to know all of what I am doing and keep up with me on socials as well. I'm pretty active on social media and do really enjoy connecting with people both informally and formally. So
amazing. We're going to put all of those on our show notes so people can find you if they've forgotten. Thank you so much for joining.
thanks for having me.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening.
And remember to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Girls That ADHD for more ADHD realness, to ask us questions or slide into our DMs with episode ideas.
And sign up to our newsletter at girlsthatadhd.com to stay updated on new episodes, toolkits, workshops, and book in ADHD coaching if you're ready to work with your brain, not against it.
And if you found this episode useful, leave us a quick review because it really does help us reach more ADHDers and help them find us in the chaos.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.